And welcome to another recording of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. We are back with more news, tech content, and wisdom from the world of marketing. Joining me, my co-host, a marketing speaker and consultant who spent his whole career helping his customers keep their marketing simple but effective. He's the author of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 Marketing Plans and the creator of the Roger video series. I give you Mr. Roger Edwards.
Oh, thank you so much. And of course, my co-host is a digital marketing veteran. He's a speaker, trainer, and advisor with nearly 3 decades of experience. He enjoys revealing visual storytelling techniques to help you build better online campaigns faster. I give you all the way from La France, Monsieur Pascal Fintoni.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to your viewers and listeners. We really appreciate your support. We are today recording episode 104, Roger.
104. Do you know, it's just a little thing, but when I do the very small audio overdub for the audio version of the podcast, which we put up on Captivate, it just feels weird to have to say 104 as opposed to 87 and 92 and stuff, because 104 takes up more space, and I've only got about 30 seconds to get the title of the podcast in before the music fades out. Just a little thing, I thought I'd mention it.
Well, if I may share my little thing, so for people, regular listeners and viewers, you know that we share the work with Roger. So Roger looking after the audio experience, I look after the YouTube. So I received a message from YouTube saying, happy anniversary, 3 years on YouTube and all those things. And on the subject of which, we've got some new subscribers on the channel. So I want to give a shout out to 𝗂𝗍𝗃, who has a channel on YouTube called Thinking Outside the Blog, which I think is a wonderful name.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yes, I agree. Nigel Hawkins-Mason. We've got Simran Sidhu, a filmmaker, who left a lovely comment on our marketing review of The Terminator. And finally, shout out to Ghostbusters Collector 8593. No point to guessing which movie this gentleman or lady is a big fan of, and they left a couple of comments on our marketing review of Ghostbusters, saying that it's probably one of the best marketing campaigns out there. And I would agree, it's probably one of the top 10 for me.
Fantastic. It's great to see people commenting and sharing, so thank you for that. I'll back up what Pascal said. Thank you so much for subscribing.
Oh, absolutely. No, we do this. I mean, granted, this started as you and I having conversation to keep, kind of madness and boredom at bay during the pandemic. 3 years later, with a lovely audience, as people have mentioned a moment ago, we're going to go through segments. We've got lots to go through to be a source of ideas and stimulating your imagination for marketing. But it was your turn to select the film for film marketing, and to take us back to the mid-90s.
Yeah, we're going to go back to 1995. Crikey, that's nearly 30 years ago, Pascal. It just seems ridiculous to say that, but we are going to talk about probably one of the best cop versus villain films ever filmed. We are going to be talking about Heat, starring Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. Absolutely superb film.
I can't wait to have a conversation about this. But before we do so, let's begin with our very first segment, In the News.
Research from the Chartered Institute of Marketing has found that 49% of marketers are wary of working on sustainability projects in case they're accused of greenwashing.
Okay, well, according to a survey by the Conference Board, marketers are mixed on the impact of AI, with more than 40% expecting improvement to work quality and creativity, and nearly 30% expecting a decline.
UK discount retailer Wilko has called in the administrators. Some are pointing to the impact of the pandemic, Brexit and inflation. Others are suggesting that the marketing strategy was simply broken.
Shopify has finally launched Sidekick, a first-of-its-kind AI-enabled commerce assistant for online traders, able to answer their questions as they launch and scale their business.
Walt Disney is shutting down its division for developing metaverse strategies, known as the Next Generation Storytelling and Consumer Experiences Unit.
According to Phil Rowley at campaignlive.co.uk, marketers should reframe their idea of what the metaverse is and where its biggest chances of success has always been, in the gaming space.
Beer fans can download the Desperados Dance Club app, then turn on the pedometer on their phones and party with their friends to get tickets, VIP access, artist merch and more.
La-Z-Boy, the brand behind the famous recliner chairs, launched a new marketing campaign, Long Live the Lazy, and a prototype model called the Decliner with a D, an AI-powered recliner that creates a cancellation excuse via SMS by pulling its handle.
Fantastic. Lazy boy.
We're going to come back to that because I have a story to tell you about lazy boys. But I'm going to go back to the very, very start. This in the news selection on this occasion feels almost like told you so moment for you and I and for many marketers out there. Let's begin with the first two because it could almost be combined. The fear of being accused of greenwashing and people being pretty split in terms of the impact of AI, improvement on quality, or simply a decline on quality and creativity. This is something that you and I have observed, for a while now.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? I was watching a news item on TV the other day, and the guy being interviewed on TV was somebody that I know and somebody that I've been out for dinner with a few times when he was a journalist, and he had a really hard time because the journalist was basically trying to stitch him up. I won't go into the what the subject was. It was actually about LBGT, but the TV presenter was trying to get him to say something which I knew would annoy people and offend people, and he was trying to avoid being drawn into that discussion. And it just made me realize that so many of the things that we do these days are just polarized, aren't they? You're either right or you're wrong, or you're at one extreme and the other. And we never seem to have that common ground in the middle where we can just have a discussion about it. So I'm not surprised that people are frightened. Now, 50% of people are wary of working on sustainability projects because they don't want to be accused of greenwashing. But actually, they probably should be working on sustainability projects because that will help, keep the planet going for many, many more millennia so that we can continue to survive. And yet people are frightened of talking about this. And it worries me that we're in this world now where we can't have a healthy debate. You've got to be at one extreme of the debate or at the other.
And to your point, we now know, and that's been reported that in the news and also our content spotlights, it is a fact that consumers want to align themselves and spend their money where there is a demonstration of value and contribution to the wider community and so on. So it's I think it's a great shame, and I think you're absolutely right to pinpointing the either the traditional media, as you mentioned, TV, but also what's happening on social media, which is about headline grabbing, attention grabbing. I mean, I despair sometimes, and even some platforms that should know better, where you read the title, you kind of go, and then actually it's nothing at all, as suggested by the headline. So for me, it's a question of I want to be able to operate in a world, a business world, and a society where brands and young entrepreneurs and online traders can be allowed to experiment, get it wrong, share their stories, share the kind of highs and lows of what it's like to run a business without being attacked by media or pseudo journalism.
Yeah, absolutely right. No, it's really sad. I mean, the sustainability thing is a good case in point. What would be wrong is having a sustainability project and then bombarding your clients with emails, for example, day in, day out, talking about it. That to me is the bad thing. It's doing something good and communicating it badly. But to be frightened of doing something good because you might upset people who don't agree with it is just wrong.
No, completely. I totally agree. And I think you really have you're pointing out what's happening with regard to mood, but also stimulating the wrong kind of mood. And I think to your point, anyone should have just a balance view, be neutral, thinking, well, actually, I don't know, I don't have the information, so I'll take a punt and assume that this brand claims are not false about whatever they are supporting as an activity. And if I am in doubt, let me do my research, but I'm not going to rely on some journalist or some kind of social media, kind of armchair warrior to kind of dictate my views. Let me move on to, I suppose, from kind of AI greenwashing to the metaverse. And people will know, I think of the metaverse, but the Walt Disney story and this comment from Phil Riley at Campaign Live is literally confirming what you and I have been saying for quite a while, which is you're really making your life very, very difficult if you're attempting to bring an audience into a completely different environment which is also dictated by access to equipment, which are, those really still to this day, pretty ugly, bulky, uncomfortable headsets, when they are already elsewhere. And I think, thanks to you and your interest in Fortnite, which I'm doing rather well, I must say, although I've spent most of my time hiding from others, which is why I do so well. But, you brought in the news segment many a time stories of brands using Fortnite as a platform to promote themselves. And to me, the Walt Disney and the gaming space is almost one of those where surely I can't be smarter than the team at Walt Disney. When I said to them, that was daft idea. Just bring your storytelling and, what is the term that you use? The next generation storytelling, but take it where people are, which is the gaming space.
Yeah. I mean, we said it on this very show, didn't we? On this very show that the metaverse would be perfectly suited to the gaming environment. And we also said on this show that the hype surrounding the metaverse was so overblown because people weren't doing the absolute basics. They weren't researching their customers and saying, what is the problem that the metaverse fixes? And they finally agreed with us. There isn't one, unless you've got that gaming environment, or there are some use cases that we do know about where it can work as well. But the hype from a couple of years ago, where we were all going to be sitting in rooms wearing headsets and having meetings with cartoons instead of ourselves, absolute nonsense. And of course, it's come out in the wash. And I think we should as well use that historically as an example when the next big fad hits us. Now, obviously, we've gone through the ChatGPT AI fad. That sort of seems to be simmering down a bit, but undoubtedly there'll be something else next year or the year after that everybody will lose their shit over. And we've just got to remember what happened here with the metaverse. By all means, use new technology. We absolutely have to use new technology, but work out what problem that technology is fixing by talking to customers and then develop the product or the service or the solution to fix that problem. Don't just build something because you think it's great and that it will eventually take off. You have to do the basics.
And for sure, we must allow for R&D. R&D is very important. So, of course, it made sense for Walt Disney to explore the metaverse, to do a business case, do some experiments and so on. But from a marketing, communication and engagement, it reminds me of a statement that I sometimes share during the workshops with my clients where I say, you've got two options. You can launch your own magazine, or you can negotiate you being included in an existing trusted magazine. Which option is going to be the path of least pain and suffering when you think about it? So what I will say, though, I am almost disappointed for the team working for that next generation storytelling, because I think the metaverse is now part of the mix. And it feels almost like quite a drastic decision to close the entire division, because there has to be space for innovation and research. But talking about innovation, creativity, so out of interest, do you like the Desperados beer?
Never heard of it.
Do you
Never tried it.
Well, you mentioned many a time during the introduction that I am currently in France, so very lucky. Just walking distance to the beach, they have beach bars, and the Desperado with a bit of green lime on top of the bottle is basically the drink of choice. I don't think I'd be downloading the app, but the lazy boy going for the decliner and the long live the lazy. That's exactly what brands should be doing. Literally, forgive me, leaning onto what they stand for and creating a campaign if it's on right.
Yeah, I mean, that's fun, and it's relevant, and it works, and we should be seeing much more of that sort of creative stuff.
I was mentioning earlier that I had the story about the Lazy Boys. So made famous, I think, by one episode of Friends, when Joey and Chandler get to Lazy Boy chairs and literally spend days and days not moving from the apartment with the sentence, inside good, outside bad. So I'm not convinced he was the official Lazy Boys, but I got a version of the Lazy Boy. And I tried to mimic that scene, when they literally reclined in sync in the episode of Friends. But I was a bit carried away, and I did it a bit too briskly to the point where I toppled over, literally backwards, and ended up with the almighty clatter on the floor. And Dennis came running in saying, I think you're taking this far too seriously. You meant to recline gently. But yeah, the idea of the decliner, whereby if you're invited somewhere, you pull the handle and will automatically auto-generate a excuse as to why you can't go to a friend's party, perhaps because they're dancing away with the 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝗀𝗶 party app, because you'd rather stay in. But no, I thought that the long live the lazy, for me, people take the time to research and look at the advert. That is what I've mentioned in the news, which is consumers want brands to use wit and to really claim what they stand for, and I think we should see that more and more often.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree.
All right. Well, listen, it's always a pleasure to hear your views and first-hand reactions to the latest news items. But let's slow things down with our next segment, the Content Spotlights. Now, in this segment, Roger and I bring to the virtual table an article, a video, a podcast, even a book, anything that can help us reflect on what it means to be a marketer and business owner in today's economy. So, Roger, what is your selection for episode 104?
Okay, so I'm going to talk about YouTube this week. Now, you always introduce me as the creator of the 𝗪𝗲𝗲𝗸 video series in the introduction to Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast. Now, I've recently passed 3,000 subscribers on my YouTube channel, which, of course, I'm absolutely delighted about. But when I look at some of the channels out there that have got hundreds of thousands, if not millions, if not hundreds of millions of views, I realize that I'm still actually at a very small channel, but I'm enjoying it, and I will continue to create videos as long as I can think of interesting things to do. But I came across this article, which actually is useful for me to reflect upon as somebody who's just hit a milestone, but probably is useful for anybody who's thinking of either starting a YouTube channel or is just getting into it and maybe is in a similar position to me with a few hundred or a few thousand subscribers. The heading of the article is 9 Common Reasons Why New YouTube Channels Fail. It's on a website I've not come across before. It's called makeuseof.com, and the article is written by Jose Luansing Jr. So obviously there's a bit of preamble, and it says that you can make money out of YouTube, and a lot of people get into it from a combination of just liking making films, liking making vlogs, whatever it is, but also they have this a desire to build a community and ultimately to make money out of it. So he then goes through these 9 reasons why YouTube channels fail, and a lot of it is down to perception. And the number one thing is getting into YouTube just for the money. And the bottom line is there are people out there who are making absolute stacks of cash out of YouTube, but they have millions, hundreds of thousands, millions of subscribers, and they will get a decent income and a decent lifestyle from that. But you have to be honest, you are not going to make millions from YouTube unless you get into that realm. Now, I've got 3,000 subscribers and I am monetized on YouTube, and I can absolutely guarantee that I can tell you that I could probably buy myself a couple of bottles of Desperados a month on the amount of money that I get from YouTube. So the bottom line is, when you start it, don't go in there thinking that you're going to be able to give up your day job and live off the income from YouTube, because it ain't going to happen unless you hit the massive numbers of subscribers and views. And we are talking millions and millions of views here, because they are only going to pay you an tiny little bit. The second thing is starting with 0 following. Now, if you start a YouTube channel, you're not going to have any followers, and starting from scratch is very, very difficult. So what the author is saying is it's maybe a good job to probably start on an easier channel, something like Instagram or TikTok or even Twitter, so that you've already got a bit of a community or an audience who you can then cross-pollinate, I guess, with your YouTube channel. And this resonates with me, actually, because I guess when I started my YouTube channel, I already had more of a following on Twitter and on Instagram and on LinkedIn, and therefore I've been able to post, when I put up a new video, I've been able to link Twitter Instagram, etc., Facebook to the YouTube channel to increase views and hopefully get more subscribers. So it's worth having a think about your audience. If you've got 0 followers on YouTube, where can you immediately start with more of a community? And that could be another social media platform. The third thing is, a lot of people fail because they blindly try to copy successful YouTube channels. So let's face it, you're not going to be Mr. Beast. You're not going to be Casey Neistat. Don't go in there and try to copy them, because A, you won't do it as well as they do, and B, people will see through it. You've got to find your own voice, find your own style, and work on developing that. Number 4 made me laugh a bit, because again, in the early days, I guess this is absolutely spot on. Consistently using the same sound effects and audio. Now, of course, this resonates with me as well, because in the early days when I started doing my videos, I would just use the music that YouTube allows you to use copyright free, and that's a very limited amount. I learned down the line. Now I use Epidemic Sound. We've talked about Epidemic Sound in Marketing Tech and Apps on the show. So again, don't use the same sound effects and the same audio. Spice it up a little bit. Get some different sound effects from somewhere else. Make your own sound effects. Carry a microphone around with you. Slam a few doors. Mow the lawn, or take some sounds of trains going past or cars going past. Make it sound different. The number 5, again, is very interesting. Don't limit yourself to popular niches. And again, I'm sitting here thinking, I tend to favor the sort of travel type of vlog, but that's a very overused space. There are so many travel vloggers. Again, what he's saying here is try to find a niche for yourself, maybe just something slightly different. It was interesting. I tend to do a vlog about the Edinburgh Festival. I've done it for the last couple of years, but I said to Tricia this year, do you know what? I'm just not going to do a vlog about the Edinburgh Festival, because so many people do vlogs about the Edinburgh Festival. The chances of somebody actually watching mine are quite low because there's so many of them. But a way to stand out would probably to be do a video of me in Edinburgh saying, do you know what, this festival is absolutely awful. It absolutely sucks. It's the worst festival ever, just because it stands out, because I've done something a little bit different. Number 6, mimicking other YouTubers' editing and videography. I guess that's a bit like, don't try copying Mr. Beast. Don't try copying Casey Neistat. Again, come up with your own type of style and your own type of cinematography. Number 7, don't use corny thumbnails and clickbait titles. Now, admittedly, there are people out there who have huge followings, and some of their thumbnails are very clickbaity, and some of their titles are very clickbaity, but they've already got millions of subscribers, so they can sort of get away with it. If you're starting out and you haven't got the following, people are not going to forgive you for clickbait, and then you're not going to be able to grow purely on the basis of clickbait. So you've got to be honest and tell people what they're going to watch, and so that when they click on your video, their expectations are realized. And number 8, don't rely on the AdSense revenue. As I said earlier, unless you have got hundreds and thousands, millions of subscribers, you're being paid on a YouTube video something like $0.003 per view. So that is what? A 30th of a cent. So it's going to take you a long time to earn a lot of money. And number 9, don't invest in YouTube courses and tools. There are loads of people out there selling courses to tell you how you can crack YouTube, and those courses usually cost $97, because the 7 always makes you buy, doesn't it? And a lot of those courses are just rubbish. But people are desperate for that quick fix, for that quick shortcut, aren't they? And unfortunately, sometimes they'll buy into these courses and they won't get anything from them other than a $97 hole in their wallet. So quite some interesting things to think about in that article. I quite liked it. It made me smile a few times because it resonated with me as a YouTube creator. So what do you think, Pascal?
I like it a lot. And I have to tell you that number 2, I went, oh, wow, that's
Yeah.
very, very smart. That's very, very smart. But as I was listening to you, I was literally projected back in time into the mini conversation I've had with my customers and trainees, where someone would say to you, I want to become a YouTuber. And I always thought that was a strange statement. Someone saying, I want to be an influencer. I said, no, well, you mean you want to become a media production company? Do you want to become a performer? Do you want to become an actor? Do you want to become a video journalist? But being a YouTuber doesn't exist. You have to have a professional undertaking behind it. And I think for me, what is important, and the 9 points you've made was also asking you the reflection of what do you want YouTube to do for you? Is essentially a repository of your videos, and you can point your clients to it, but it shouldn't be a source of revenue. Because the moment you want this to become a source of revenue, you are entering the world of media production. But perhaps that is not at all what your business does. And it's a bit like, you using the term AdSense then takes me back to the early days of blogging, where people were blogging and trying to squeeze in as many adverts as they could, linked to the keywords, hoping to make an absolute fortune. And of course, it never happened unless you were an author, unless you were a journalist. And of course, the blogging became your platform. I think what we're going to see across all environments, YouTube, the metaverse, Facebook, Threads, Twitter, I think we're going to see people just getting a little wiser. It's going to start to rationalize itself. People are going to come down. But it's also, clearly there's still far too much of that, very bombastic headlines and promises about if you go online, you don't have to put the work in to make an absolute fortune. And I can't wait for this nonsense to go away.
No, I think I mean you are a filmmaker and you've produced cinema quality films. I'm a vlogger with a DJI Pocket 2, but don't underestimate the amount of work that goes into filming a 15-minute vlog. You've got to film it. I obsess about the color, so I make sure that the color grades, if I take one shot from one angle and another from another and the lighting's different, I'll try and correct it. Now, I imagine that most people who watch the videos really wouldn't even notice at all, but it's just the way I am. I'm just a bit of a perfectionist like that. I select the music, I do the editing, then I write the notes and everything. So putting together a 10-minute video it takes a lot of work, and like a lot of things we've always say on this show, there's no shortcut. You can't bypass that hard work.
No, and you can't bypass the reflection prior to do anything, which is the audience, the subject matter you want to be helping them with, and so on. So all that pre-production work, which I know sometimes is nowhere near as exciting, I get it, as filming, writing, or doing photography, is so vastly important. And I think some of the points you highlighted did remind everyone about this as well.
So Pascal, tell me about your content spotlight.
Now, this one feels rather special, and I'm really unsure about how to approach it. So let me start by telling you about the title of this article. It's an interview. How has marketing changed over the past half century? And this is an interview with none other than Philip Kotler and Alexander Chernev. And we're the co-authors of the 16th edition of the book Marketing Management. Now, you heard a moment ago the reaction from Roger when I mentioned the term Philip Kotler. So actually, let's start with that before I move into the article and the edition of the book. I mean, I went into the university in London, Brunel University. I took a business and marketing course. And of course, we were given an abridged version of an edition of marketing management. And honestly, that's probably the only module I remember was the marketing bit. We did everything else, business, admin, finance, and so on. But to read and learn about the theories and the case studies from Philip Kotler and co-authors was just wonderful. And to this day, you and I still talk about those key principles.
Absolutely right. I mean, Kotler is one of the marketing godfathers, isn't he?
And did you study as well or read his books back in the days?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can remember talking about Kotler when I was at university and reading a lot of his stuff in my early days as a marketing assistant and assistant product manager.
For me, I sometimes stumbled upon some of his talks from maybe 10, 20 years ago, and I just watched them and there's just him on stage with a flip chart, and there's no gimmicks, and he really knows his stuff. And this kind of article was prompted by what I'm seeing a lot on LinkedIn, interestingly, from, well, I'm going to be frank, Roger, younger marketers who are starting to be dismissive of our generation, saying we slow things down, we're not innovative enough. There was some bizarre biased views about how directors are far too old and we should kick them out of the boardroom and let people like me. And then in response, on LinkedIn, you'll say, well, all you're doing is peddling gimmicks. You don't know anything about strategy. So we're going to settle things down. But in terms of Philip Kotler himself, he turned 92 only a few months ago and is still busy doing, his thing. You mentioned he's an author consultant. He's a distinguished professor of international marketing at the Kellogg School of Management, and together with Alexander Chernev, who's also professor of marketing at the same school, they worked on the 6th edition of Marketing Management. This was published for the first time in 1967. Wow. It's just absolutely incredible. So I'm torn between nostalgia and the fact that this is someone that is very, very important. This bizarre movement online about trying to suggesting people like you and I've got little to offer because oddly, so it was suggesting we don't understand AI and the metaverse and so on. But here we are. So what I'm going to do, just to kind of whet people's appetite and for them to follow the link into the show note, I've taken some statements from the interview that is designed to promote the book, and I'm going to ask for your reactions. So it begins with a statement from Philip Kotler when he says, one of the key underlying ideas advanced in the very first edition, 1967, of the book, was that company actions must be driven by customers and their needs. The rise of big data, social media, and so on has changed nothing. And that is to say that the key purpose of any company is to create value for its customers. What has changed are the tools, but they are just tools. Without the sound strategy guiding their use, they can become a distraction from a company's core mission. I'll finish with two more statements relating to things we mentioned, particularly in the news. Philip Kotler in the interview says, I'm wondering what's going to happen to in-store shopping. It is conceivable that you can get everything that you want without ever going to a store. So a store has to be special. You have to design a good experience. And then Alexander Chernev quote is as follows: a challenge with marketing is that in some companies, it's viewed too narrowly and limited to advertising and communication. Sounds familiar, Roger? This creates a problem because marketing is a much broader discipline. And so it goes on. And please follow the link. Read the article. It's not very long at all. And if you haven't got yet a copy, no matter the edition of Marketing Management, do seek it out.
Wow. I mean, talking about LinkedIn, I got involved in a conversation on LinkedIn. This could have been purely done for this as a reaction to this, but somebody was going on in LinkedIn saying marketing is changing so much every day these days that nobody can keep up with marketing anymore, and it's not possible to understand marketing. And no. That is only true if your view of marketing is purely about the communications tactics of marketing. Because yes, we've got AI, we've got digital that's been, over the last decade. We've got all sorts of apps coming out each day. We've got all sorts of platforms coming out each day. I agree that marketing tools, which you just said there in that statement, the tools change. Yes, we've got to keep up with the tools, but the basics, the customer focus, the segmentation, the positioning, the development of products and pricing of products, that strategical stuff. That has not changed. It all starts with the customer. What do I say in my own book? It starts with a obsessive understanding of the customer, a deep, almost obsessive understanding of the customer. And the problem we have with a lot of marketers these days is that they've never been trained on that wider discipline. They're just advertisers. They're just communicators. They're just SEO people. They're not embracing the full discipline. Now, it might not be their fault. They may not have been taught this. But if they are aware of it, then this head in the sand thing that says, oh no, people who talk about strategy are slowing things down, that is BS. That is BS, because you will not succeed if you only do tactics.
You know, it's absolutely right that you and I should be defending the profession, our profession, that of our viewers and listeners. I just want to close quickly, if you don't mind, with just reminding people about the full title of that book that is getting the 16th edition. So marketing management, and then it follows analysis, planning, implementation, and control. And this book was short of 700 pages. Now, I'm going to ask people to read all that, but this structure, you know, which is there to actually liberate your creative thinking so that you can come up with, you know, tactics we mentioned in the news, like Lazy Boy and 𝗓𝗏𝗏𝗏s and many, many others that we've mentioned to you over the last 3 months. It's all there so that you have a blueprint to inform your colleagues, to engage, you know, of course, your team members to implement this kind of things. And I would go as far as saying that if on occasion the article mentioned that 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗏 Kotler is a bit concerned about the removal of chief marketing officers, and instead we have some weird titles that we mentioned, like chief growth officers and whatever that's supposed to stand for.
Marketing
and what he's saying,
𝗓𝗏𝗏.
or ninjas and all sort of. And what he's suggesting is be very, very careful. But also, I would go as far as saying that, because I've witnessed it and I've been on the receiving end of it, where if you're in a board meeting situation where all the other functions are represented, you know, can you explain to me, Roger, why everybody has an opinion about your marketing campaign, but I wouldn't dare to criticize someone working as part of ops, HR, finance, and so on. So there's also something there for the managing director or the chairman to defend marketing as a function, to educate every single board members, and it needs to cascade down to the team in terms of what it is, which is not just, as I've heard people say, the pretty pictures department or advertising.
No, and one of the problems we have, Pascal, again, is that a lot of CEOs these days don't get what marketing is either, and therefore it percolates from the top down as well, unfortunately. But we're here to make sure that this doesn't happen, and we're going to carry on banging this drum until everybody understands that marketing is a much wider discipline. Very exciting, much wider discipline.
Very exciting. Thank you so much. Wow, that was fun. Listen, as we said before many a time, none of this would be possible without the hard work of pioneers and visionaries of the recent and distant past. It is time to move on to our next segment, This Week in History.
In 1939, the musical film The Wizard of Oz, starring Judy Garland, Ray Bolger, Burt Lahr, Jack Haley and Margaret Hamilton, opens at the Loew's Capitol Theatre in New York City.
A few years later, in 1945, English author George Orwell publishes Animal Farm, the anti-utopian satire that became a classic.
In 1981, IBM releases the first personal computer, the IBM 5150. Pricing started at $1,565, and the reaction from the public was overwhelmingly positive, with customers offering prepayment with no delivery date.
In 2005, the film Snakes on Plane is announced and becomes a major internet sensation, leading to New Line Cinema incorporating feedback from users, including catchphrases and imaginative deaths. You know, I remember that vividly, actually, how people were able to give literally Samuel L. Jackson lines to say on the film, which appeared, and to also let the film directors know how they want people to die, which is actually quite gruesome. But we should maybe actually, I'm thinking out loud, include this in film marketing, because that was the very, very first one where there was a link between online audiences, internet users, and filmmaking.
When you actually think about it, it's very hard to make a decent film on a plane, isn't it? Because there's not really very many places you can go on a plane. You've got the aisle, you've got the cockpit, the galley, and maybe some planes are big enough for them to have a bit underneath where there's like a kitchen downstairs or something. But to create tension, to create fear within that constrictive environment is actually very hard.
Yeah, and I think the only time I would say it's worked is in the World War Z, if you remember that moment. It's very similar where they're trying to stack up the suitcases to create a bit of a war, which doesn't work at all. I hope you don't mind, but I think it's important we spend some time on the first personal computer because we are where we are thanks to the IBM 5150. At the time, if memory serves, it had that kind of green monochrome screen and those very large floppy disk, and making absolutely, the noise coming out of the fan, coming out of this computer was extraordinary. I did a bit of research because you mentioned the price just over $1,500. That would be the equivalent to over $5,000 today's money. I mean, thank God for IBM because nobody at the time had the might and I suppose the resources to attempt a personal computer. The computers for universities and the army and education, government, but you and I had to wait till this one.
Yeah, I mean, I was still at school, obviously, in these days, and I remember these personal computers. One of our science teachers had. It wasn't an IBM. It was a Research Machines 380Z, but very, very similar sort of thing. And it was the only one, and he was good enough to let students take it home at weekends to play with. And I used to do the basic programming and trying to write computer games and things like that. And then I think along came the Commodore PET. I remember the Commodore PET. There was a TRS-80. Who I can't remember who. Tandy was the TRS-80, wasn't it? But yeah, the IBM was the first one, and that's effectively now why we all have PCs on our desks.
I think for me, what was interesting, you're right, it's almost like the color television. Not everybody had one, and you had to have, but this idea of people got so excited that they offered to pay for something with no idea of when they were going to get it, and the anticipation. But then you had the birth of the first, personal computer clubs. I mean, we used to go to one with my dad, and people used to share tips and hints as we are through the podcast. Back in the days, we used to have this kind of bizarre trading of cassette with different games and different programs, and of course, entire kind of industry around magazines, dedicated to computers and so on was born out of that. And I just like in this segment to just pause for a moment, thinking, well, in 2023, I can do all the things I can do via my laptop, thanks to something that was invented now a long time ago.
Yeah, absolutely right, and I've always had that sort of affinity with the development of computers. I used to get very excited when something new came out. So the aforementioned TRS-80, the Commodore PET, I remember. Then there was the Commodore 64, which was effectively a Commodore PET without the built-in screen. And then obviously the Clive Sinclair computers, the ZX80 and the ZX81, massive strides forwards. And it's just nostalgia, but it's important because it's a foundation of the world we live in today.
I remember when my father was trying to decide which computers to get. I mean, these were very small independent stores as well. This is not what we have nowadays, with the Apple Store or Currys and the others. These were independent retailers. So he was allowed and literally given 4 or 5 different computers to take home at the weekend.
Yeah.
And so suddenly the living room was full of this kind of wonderful machines. And we were so excited with my brothers, and literally spent the weekend trying by this one and the Macintosh, of course, and this and the other. And I decided on one and took the others back. I mean, I can't imagine that you'd be able to take 4 or 5 different laptops to your home, Roger, and then decide which one you like best.
Which one you want.
Finally, one of my regrets, I've never seen The Wizard of Oz on the big screen.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm told it's quite an experience.
It's a milestone, isn't it? I can't believe it's so old, that film now, coming up to 90 years old. And it was a combination of black and white and colour, some quite impressive special effects for a film that old.
Indeed.
It is an incredible film. Not my favourite. I mean, it's one of those films I appreciate for its historical significance and for the production values. I wouldn't probably choose to watch it, but it's one of those films that if I flick through the channels and I come across it, I usually end up watching it. You know what I mean?
No, and I think you're right that the practical effects are just so clever, innovative, proper movie magic. Now listen, I'm always so very fond of these trips down memory lanes, but we must move on and get back to the present with the next segment, Marketing Tech and Apps. Okay, Roger, so what wonders from the internet have you unearthed to make our life easier as content creators?
This week I've come across two things that I want to talk about. They're sort of related because you can use them for videos. But the first one is called 𝗧𝗵𝗀. Now, I first thought we may have reviewed this before, but in fact, it turns out we've probably reviewed something similar. But basically what 𝗧𝗵𝗀 does is it's AI-based, and it will take a long-form video, for example, an episode of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast, which usually run at around about an hour and 10 minutes, give or take, and it will use the AI to find parts of that video, and it will chop it down and create vertical videos for TikTok, Reels, and Shorts. And so I gave it a go, Pascal. You get 90 minutes free to start with, and then you can obviously pay for a subscription after that. So I uploaded half of the last episode of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast, and it gave me 8 vertical videos back within about 3 hours, and I was actually quite surprised by what a good job it did of them. It didn't just say, right, here's a minute from the middle of the video, and it just basically chopped off the beginning and end, and we had that minute. It literally did edit bits together. So there's a clip of you talking about X, because last week we talked about Twitter and becoming X and all of that, and it has created a 30-second video out of what you were saying, but it has edited it because I can see the jumps. So it hasn't just isolated you talking for 13 minutes, 13 seconds. It has actually edited it down. And it's not seamless because obviously it's a jump cut and your head moves a little bit as you would expect, but it is actually a pretty remarkable job. So I think this is one to have a look at if you are creating videos like Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast, talking heads videos, effectively, where you're doing interviews or discussions. It works absolutely perfectly. Now they're absolutely honest about it on the website and says if you're a vlogger, a travel vlogger or a fitness vlogger or whatever it is, it's not going to work. It's not sophisticated enough to chop up a travel video or a cooking show video or something like that into segments. This is specializing in talking heads, but it's definitely worth looking at it for that 90 minutes free, and it may just convince you that you want to sign up for the full package. The second thing is a new add-on to the Adobe Creator Suite, which again I think we have mentioned before. It's called Adobe Firefly, and this uses generative AI to edit photographs. Now I've seen a few people using this on YouTube videos, and it does look incredible, but it's like a lot of things. I find these days is that the AI expectation that you get is never really borne out in the reality when you get your hands on it yourself. So I've seen a few people on videos creating these masterpieces, fantasy photographs of people stood on train platforms with swords and horses and stuff like that. But when I try it out, it looks so obviously fake that I don't know what I'm doing wrong with the prompting or anything. But what I have found with this is a really interesting thing that's useful for videos. But just to give you an example, you could upload a photograph of you sat in your garden, and then you notice in the background the dustbin's there, or there's some washing hanging out. So what you can do is you can just highlight that part of the picture and type in and say, remove the washing or remove the dustbin, and it removes the dustbin. And it does a pretty good job of it. Sometimes you can see a little bit of fuzziness or something, or perhaps in the background you thought it might be nicer if there was a dog or a cat there, so you can highlight a bit of the screen. You can say add a ginger cat or add a black dog, and it does it. And sometimes it doesn't get it perfectly right. I mean, I tried it the other day, and the cat's eyes were a little bit lopsided, so it obviously needs some work. But as a basis, it's interesting. No, but the one thing that I did find is, the famous glass shots that people use in films, and we obviously see them in films like Star Wars, to create a magnificent planetary vista, or a mountain range, or a deep chasm below the Death Star, or something like that. But we know that the actor is actually stood on a tiny little platform surrounded by nothing, and they effectively put this glass shot in. Well, you can do this with the generative AI, because I noticed the other day, if I had been doing a talking head video, say in the garden, and I'd noticed there was a dustbin in the background, I could then take a single frame shot of me in that video, import it into Adobe Firefly, say remove the dustbin, and then effectively reinsert that corner of the video. And as long as I don't move myself into that corner of the video, then it would look like the dustbin wasn't there. Obviously, if I move too far over, my hand or my face would disappear underneath the glass shot effectively. But that would, to me, is a very interesting use for this generative AI photo thing, Adobe Firefly. It's also built into the latest version of Photoshop as well. So if you have taken some video and you would inadvertently take video of something you didn't want in the shot, you could use this to effectively edit that shot out quite easily, rather than having to painstakingly mask each and every frame, which is what we used to have to do before.
I mean, both your options are I just can't wait to have a go at the Opus clip. I like that because it's also part of the tone of voice of vertical videos, the kind of jump cuts and moving along with the narrative, and those kind of removing or adding elements. I mean, it wasn't the Adobe Firefly, but I had another one on my phone when a few weeks ago I went to the Guns N' Roses concert in Paris, present for my sister. And from the angle, when I was taking pictures of the scene, we had one of the massive speakers. I mean, they were like the size of a small house, halfway through, and it was really kind of a black dot, in the middle of the picture. And when I removed it, AI actually completed the stage, but also the Guns N' Roses logo behind that was masked by the speaker had been recreated pretty closely. I mean, you have to really look, like you said, to see the pixelation and fuzziness. So I think we're going to see more and more of that for improvement. Sadly, it's also going to be used for other, malicious use, but there'll be ways and means to kind of control that. Well, we've done it again, maybe for the third or fourth time, where you and I, by accident, have chosen a similar theme for marketing tech and apps, because we never talked to each other before revealing our selection. So, as is often the case, mine has been inspired by a recent conversation with a client who was asking about a review of their content marketing strategy and saying, is there anything that I'm missing in the content marketing mix? And I said, well, I think out loud and putting me on the spot, two, maybe you could do with more free downloads or kind of that type of giveaways, not checklists and templates. But the other thing that you do, you're very active on social media, but ultimately we need to accept that not everyone's going to be able to see your photos and videos. And what you should be doing is maybe a weekly, maybe a monthly roundup of, not all, maybe your best, more popular photos and videos, and create a very off-the-cuff vlog, something very disposable. You don't have to necessarily spend a lot of time on it and put it on YouTube. So, well, what do you have? Because my time is obviously very, very short. So, well, actually, something that you and I have mentioned before on Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast, there's an app called Quick by GoPro, and they have done a big, massive reset on the app itself. There's more templates, more music, as you mentioned a moment ago. There's also now edit to music, so it would find the beat of the music and do the jump cut you mentioned a moment ago, and the transition to the beat of the music, saving you an enormous amount of time for what is essentially, like I said, very disposable content. So Quick by GoPro, who now have a AI video assistant, is really worth your while. But I thought I should do my job and give them options. So, of course, I went online and I came across this platform called Kovimeo. I've never heard of it before. I clicked on the link and then I was taken to Vimeo. I thought, well, I've got that wrong. So I go back a step I see the page for 𝗏𝗵𝗀, I click on the link, and back on Vimeo. And so it happens that Vimeo has bought them some time ago. And here I am rediscovering the completely redesigned video editing experience and platform of Vimeo. You know, I mentioned it about a year ago. I am a video account holder, but I just upload videos and I don't really use them for video editing. And I have to tell you, I was really, really impressed. I think that if you do have an account as I have, where you pay your monthly fee and you want to do some very quick, fast editing for something, again, that is not going to have a particularly long shelf life, you should definitely go on to vimeo.com/video-editor. They've got templates, they've got different sizes, they can also, using AI, spot moments where there's motion to kind of do some very interesting things. And I thought that's definitely worthy of your consideration as part of your toolkit. But as you mentioned a moment ago, these are just tools. You need to have a good strategy to inform your decisions moving forward.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Vimeo is always one of those platforms that I forget about, and then get reintroduced to it, just like you have, because one of the advantages of Vimeo is, a lot of people do use it a bit like YouTube, don't they, as a way of hosting videos. But if you upload a video to YouTube, and then maybe a week later you notice that you've put a typo in your caption slide or something, you can't go back and re-upload the corrected video to that YouTube.
It's such a pain, isn't it? Yeah.
Basically, once it's uploaded, you're going to have to leave it there, especially if it's got loads of views. Whereas with Vimeo, if you did the same thing, you came across a mistake, they would allow you to retain the notes and everything and just upload the corrected version.
That's a massive advantage, because if you have, for example, as I have, videos from Vimeo embedded on your blog, you can keep the same URL and everything else. But also, which is why we use it, as you know, at the end of a Vimeo video, it starts at the beginning again. It doesn't make suggestions of other videos on YouTube, could include the competition. So, we mix it up. But yeah, I, by accident, literally rediscovered the fact that Vimeo have completely redesigned their video editing platform, and it's really worth a try.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay, Roger, we have reached the final segment of Two Geeks and a Marketing podcast. Let's face it, probably one of our favorites, film marketing, just after this. So, Roger, you chose Heat, 1995, directed by Michael Mann. And for me, what is interesting about this movie, it is almost like a power story of focus and determination for both the director and filmmaker, because we're going to learn about the history of Heat, but also, of course, the story of the characters themselves, some based on real characters from a few decades ago. But before we move on to our discussion, let's watch the trailer.
You want to be making moves on the street, have no attachments, allow nothing to be in your life that you cannot walk out on in 30 seconds flat if you spot the heat around the corner.
In the city of Los Angeles.
Recognize the MO? MO is that they're good. If you think these guys are scoring once and passing through, I doubt it.
A relentless police detective is on the trail.
What do we got?
Of a master thief.
You're fugitive number one with a bullet. It's double the risk here.
You're wrong. It's 4 times the risk, and I'm double the worst trouble you ever had.
Clear!
And his reckless partner.
The bank is worth the risk. We should take it down.
I want full surveillance, 24 hours, round the clock. We never close, open 7 days a week. Assume they got our phones, assume they got our houses, assume they got us. Bam, bye-bye.
They get more daring with every score.
What's the estimate?
12.2 million.
You're up.
But one cop
He's here. I can feel it.
is closing in.
Whatever score they're gonna take next, they're gonna have the surprise of a lifetime.
Now, for the first time, Academy Award winner Al Pacino and Academy Award winner Robert De Niro collide.
If I'm there and I gotta put you away, I'll tell you, you are going down.
What if you do got me boxed in and I gotta put you down? Because no matter what, you will not get in my way. I will not hesitate for a second.
Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Val Kilmer in a Michael Mann film, Heat.
Oh, do you know, that's one of those trailers from obviously almost 30 years ago that has the voiceover. He's a cop that does this. He's a villain that does this. And he's the renegade. It's also, there's a little bit elements of cheesiness about it, isn't there? But I just love those old style trailers.
I agree. I think the world would be a better place if more trailers were done like this, because people are doing the reverse now. So they are modernizing trailers. So they will take a movie from the 80s and 90s, and people who want to kind of stretch their editing skills say, well, here it is. Here's my version, 2023, of the movie Top Gun, for example. You know? I think we should do the reverse. We should try and take a movie from quite recently and introduce the 80s and 90s style of The Voice.
Yeah, there's an idea for a YouTube channel. That would be different. That would fit the rules we were talking about earlier about doing things a little bit differently.
I remember seeing Heat at the cinema, and I have to say, I was literally swept by the marketing campaign you want to discuss in a moment. So I kind of ate all of it. And I remember my memory, and it's interesting because it's a movie that I then owned on VHS cassette, because we're going back to 1995, and I don't think I've seen it ever since. So I yesterday found it on Amazon. So it is now on my watch list. I thought, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to wait until I've spoken to Roger, because I always get so excited, and then watch it again. But what I've retained is the feeling of being conflicted, because I was almost, eventually I didn't know who I wanted. I was rooting for the cops or the baddies. It was weird, wasn't it, to be in that situation where, because Michael Mann, he does it so well, it takes you into the people element of the story. I was absolutely gutted when I won't reveal too much, but I was conflicted. I wanted both of them to do well, and of course that's not possible.
Yeah, I mean, we know that Michael Mann focuses a lot on character. For those of you who don't know Michael Mann, he was famous for Miami Vice. Obviously a very stylized show, great music, great sets, costumes, fashion, that sort of thing. And also he was responsible for a film called Manhunter, which was actually the first film that had Hannibal Lecter in it, but played by Brian Cox, I think I'm right in saying, well before Anthony Hopkins played Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. So that's perhaps a film for another day. But I think that this film is an incredible character study. I mean, you've got the lead cop played by Al Pacino and the lead villain played by Robert De Niro, but they're surrounded by colleagues as well. So there's a number of villains, there's a number of cops. And I think what works in this film is that he builds up the backstory of their personal lives so well. I mean, the cop's got a daughter who's suicidal, his marriage is falling apart. The villain has got this philosophy that he will not get involved in anything, which means he wouldn't be able to walk away from it within 30 seconds if he feels the heat from the title coming round the corner. And then, of course, he breaks that rule by falling in love with somebody during the film. But I think it's because we get sucked so well into the lives of the protagonists that you get that conflicting feeling, Pascal, because you're effectively rooting for both the cop and for the thief. You want them both to win, but obviously you know that one of them is going to end up losing. And I think that is one of the master strokes of this film. It's action-packed. There's lots of good action in it. There's a lot of violence in it, of course, but it is, on the whole, a very, very well-crafted character study.
And for me, when you're a fan, of course, you research, you read up. I mean, I'd forgotten that Michael Mann even did The Last of the Mohicans. That's something that escaped me completely.
Yeah.
Recently, I rewatched again Collateral, which is, again, just that. And the only one kind of the only style that I've seen that would do that is probably the Hong Kong cinema genre, when they came out with things like Hard Boiled and all the others, where you have both sides being essentially showcased in equal measure, and then it was, for the ultimate kind of clash at the end. And for me, I mentioned it was about focus and determination because you've done the research, and I was absolutely aghast to learn that the idea, or heat, literally came out of something that Michael Mann compiled together in 1979.
Yeah, and I think that he had this idea for this film, this character study of the cop and the thief and all of their personal lives and all of their colleagues, and he'd had this for a long time. It was originally based upon an actual true story of a villain called Neil McCauley, who was an ex-Alcatraz inmate who was planning robberies. And he was tracked down by a detective called Chuck Adamson in 1964. And Mann wrote a 180-page draft of this film that eventually became Heat, and started offering it around all the studios, and he wasn't very successful. And it's interesting, this is a theme that comes up on the show quite a lot, these people who have these visions for films, and it takes them a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of disappointment before somebody actually picks it up. But in the end, what happened is, following the success that Michael Mann had with Miami Vice and Crime Story, he was then asked to produce a pilot for a TV show based upon the Los Angeles Police Department Robbery and Homicide Division. So he used a very truncated version of his script for Heat to create this pilot, which was actually called LA Takedown in the end. And effectively, it's the same story, the same characters, but what he did is he stripped out all of those character studies. So effectively what we got was the action scenes and a little bit of the backstory, but not to the same depth. I mean, LA Takedown, I think, was a 90-minute pilot when it was shown on TV, whereas Heat, the film, is just shy of 3 hours long, so you can see how much he cut out of it. But he effectively almost like had a dry run of creating this film called LA Takedown. Now, there was a different actor playing the role of Vincent Hanna that Al Pacino eventually took on. It was Scott Plank that took that. Alex MacArthur played the character of Neil McCauley, but it was renamed to Patrick McLaren in LA Takedown, and they filmed it in 19 days, which is very unusual for Michael Mann as well, because he's such a perfectionist. Usually he will, take a long time to film a film. So this film effectively had already been made. He'd already piloted it himself. And then eventually he got the go-ahead to turn it into the film that became Heat. And that's when he re-expanded it back out, and it became the film that we've enjoyed, the 3-hour film. And again, he went into so much trouble for 9 months, Pascal, in the run-up to filming. Michael Mann went out every Friday and Saturday night with an LAPD officer called Tom Elfman, and he was out there responding to emergency calls all over the city, just getting a feel for the sort of dialogue that you would expect policemen to have, and the dispatches and the dialogue coming through from the villains and all that. And that's why the film is absolutely so compelling and so realistic. And interestingly enough, because he spent so much time out in Los Angeles, is that Los Angeles itself and the way that he shot it, Los Angeles becomes a character in its own right. The way he showcases the city with the cinematography and the music is absolutely staggering. And just as an aside, if you think back to another Al Pacino film that we've reviewed here on Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast, Sea of Love, which we did a while back. Sea of Love was Al Pacino's comeback movie. It was released in 1989, so 6 years before this. Al Pacino actually plays a very, very, very similar cop in both films. But if you remember when we did the review of Sea of Love, we said that New York almost took on this character because of the way it was shot and the way that the city at night particularly became this sort of dark place. And I think Michael Mann achieved that with this film. So not only is it a character study, not only is it absolutely incredible from a cinematography and action point of view, it's also a beautiful highlight for this city.
And what you're just mentioning was picked up a lot in the marketing effort. I mean, this is almost like method acting. We mentioned, in the content spotlight, this need to understand your customers, to analyze and so on.
Yeah.
And it was clear to him that there was no way they could do something that would really completely suck the audience into this universe and make everybody and all the characters believable if they just played pretend for the better part of 3 hours. So the actors went on boot camps, real boot camps, and they learned how to talk, how to walk, like, depending which side they were, the police or the thieves. They handled guns. We'll talk in a moment about how they used that as well as a hook for some of the marketing. So the pre-production side, once again, a lot of work's gone into it. But I have to say that when you and I went to the big screen to see Los Angeles, particularly at night, I would agree with you. But then you realize that they borrowed some of that tapestry and color palette for the marketing effort. You kind of go, there's nice cohesion there. It started to make a lot of sense to me. But that's right. If you want results, you've got to put the work in and back to focus and determination. It takes time.
Yeah. Now, we've seen the trailer. The poster, again, is actually mainly focused on the fact that this is the first time that Al Pacino and Robert De Niro have appeared in a film together. They quite weirdly stick Val Kilmer in the poster as well. I'm not sure why. I would have probably kept Val Kilmer out of the poster.
Oh, I have to tell you exactly why. This is an agent negotiating very, very hard. If I may just interject, so I think you're right, and we'll come back to the Al Pacino Robert De Niro face-off. But interestingly, for me, when I went to the cinema, I was like, well, I kind of know what's going to happen because those two amazing stars are going to do what they do best. So I was actually very intrigued about what Val Kilmer was going to do. It was kind of just coming out of doing The Doors and in a few of the movies. So actually, as a moviegoer, I was quite keen to see what Val Kilmer was going to do. And I think once you got to the point where, it's almost like screen time, I said, well, hang on a minute, there's a third and even fourth character, if you want to add 𝗏𝐶𝗵𝗄 and John Voight, that we need to kind of squeeze in. But I reckon he had a very good agent at the time.
That was it. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that because of the power of Pacino and De Niro, I'd have kept Val Kilmer out of the poster. I mean, I think the marketing for this film really focused on two main things. The first one was this fact that Pacino and De Niro were going to be in the film together, first time that they've appeared in a film together, and there's going to be this scene of them, cop versus villain, sat in a cafe, basically just having a talk like they were old buddies. And I love that line in the trailer, which says, for the first time, Academy Award winner Al Pacino and Academy Award winner Robert De Niro collide. I mean, that is just cheese, but it's absolutely spot on, isn't it? And that scene of them in the coffee shop having the chat, they actually decided to film it almost without rehearsal so that it would come across as naturally as it possibly could. And yeah, these guys are the opposite ends of the spectrum. You've got the cop, you've got the villain, and it's the job of the cop to take down the villain. But the way that these two people effectively respect each other for how well they do the opposite job. So the villain respects the cop and the cop respects the villain, and they almost have this grudging affection for each other. It's almost like a bit of a bromance, isn't it, in that scene? And yet we know that ultimately, if they have to, they'll both try to kill the other when the chips are down.
I remember not so much the poster, but the cover of the VHS cassette. But looking at the poster now, because my memory is that how blue it was, but in a good way, because all that to symbolize Los Angeles at night and, the blue lights and so on and so forth. But when you look at the poster, I think it's very interesting, back to your point about Los Angeles being made a character, and we know, enough about the pre-production work of doing location scouting, which it's a job I'd love to do. I don't know about looking for locations, but you've got Heat, and then below, one of the many strap lines, the one that was used was a Los Angeles crime saga. So both positioning, the place element, but also seeing people. It's a long movie. For 1995, I can't be sure how often you had movies nearly 3 hours long, but they wanted to make sure that this is going to take you on the journey.
Yeah, and I think that the first angle of the marketing was that big Pacino De Niro confrontation, and that's what I remember from the TV interviews at the time. That's what I remember. Any reviews of the film that came out around the time, or any discussion in magazines like Empire, focused on that confrontation. But I think the other element of the marketing that I do remember is actually focusing on Michael Mann himself, because at the time, this was post Miami Vice, and Miami Vice is one of the most iconic 1980s TV series, isn't it? The Don Johnson suits, the fashion, the music, the Jan Hammer music, the locations, the glamour of Miami. Michael Mann had this reputation for that sort of slick style and for capturing the ethos of a city and the fashions and the statements. And I remember at the time a lot of focus on that. And so the message was, this is the guy who brought you Miami Vice. Let's see how he effectively interprets Los Angeles in the same way as he interpreted Miami. And it's a shame that none of that survives. I looked for it, but I just couldn't find anything more than references to the fact. But I do remember at the time a lot of talk about how Michael Mann had this way of extracting style and fashion and vibe out of a place when he was focusing his films.
My memory, born out of the magazine I used to read, there was a magazine at the time which has gone online called Impact Magazine, and it was focused on action movies. It's just why there's a strong correlation between what was happening in Hong Kong at the time and what Michael Mann did. And I remember vividly the gunfight being praised and commented upon quite extensively, saying, if you're going to go into this film for another reason, but you've got to go and see it for the gunfight. And at the time, Andy McNabb was being mentioned a lot as being one of the consultant and gunfight choreographer who took, obviously, the actor through the boot camp. There was a lot of interviews with him. Andy McNabb essentially shot to fame for the Bravo 20 book, which was made into a TV series, if I'm not mistaken. So there's also so you had the confrontation with a dialogue point of view that was highlighted, and there's a bit of it in the trailer, but there was also the almighty gun battle that was also highlighted as part of the marketing.
Yeah, and of course, what I didn't know about the gunfight was that most gunfights in most films, they will add the sound effects of the gunshots later, because a lot of the time they're filming from a distance and this, but they actually took the trouble to mic up as much of the location as they could. So they had microphones in close proximity to the guns. They had microphones out in the street. So the sounds we actually hear are the actual sounds of the guns firing. And that soundscape that he created during that gunfight is one of the reasons why it's so powerful, because it was real, as opposed to the sort of fake gunfight sounds that we normally get in films. And I think that's possibly one of the reasons why it is so outstanding a sequence, is because you're basically right in there with the sounds and the action.
Yeah, but then there were some very confused audiences. I remember vividly saying, that gunfight that doesn't sound right, because people
Well,
have been
yeah.
so used to the fakey fake. So
Yeah.
I mean, I remember laughing, saying, "Well, of course it's a real thing." I mean, there were blanks for sure, but the sound was captured. People say, "Well, it doesn't sound right, this gunfight," and I was told it was going to be amazing. So I think, to the point though, his work about being as realistic as possible through spending time with the police, you described, to capture the vocabulary of the police force, but also the thieves, and capturing and taking into this environment. So much so that it's been talked many a time about a sequel, which is now a conversation about a prequel. So, but I think there's definitely something that audiences will go for. But again, for me, because it was 1995 and because it was a big screen experience, I would rather this to be made for theaters as opposed to a Netflix or Amazon Prime financed endeavor. What do you think?
Oh yeah, this is definitely a big screen film to watch, because of the characters and because of the city. You have to see the city, and in all its splendor and the way that it was shot and lighted. It just has to be a big screen, or the even bigger screen, the IMAX screen. Really needs something like that. No, I mean, undoubtedly, I didn't rewatch Heat in anticipation of us talking about it today. It's probably only about a year ago since we last watched it. But having spoken to you now, we do have the DVD. I will dig the DVD out. We will probably end up watching it over the weekend.
Oh, it's on the watch list on Amazon, as you heard a moment ago. Listen, well done again. As you always do this, your selection is just aptly spot on for the marketing, because it allows us to reminisce, but also to capture those marketing lessons about back to focus. You only have 3 or 4 hooks. Just lean onto them to squeeze the value out, so they don't have to bombard the audience with multiple messages in different platforms. And maybe there's something in there. We mentioned about the voice for the trailers, but also compared to today, the scarcity in terms of channels and what you could play with that may have made the marketing on occasion just a bit sharper and wiser. Everyone, this was episode 104 of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. Thank you, Rosa, for being an amazing co-host. Thank you to you for listening and watching. Please subscribe and leave your comments, suggestions in the usual places. Until the next time, go out there and make sure your marketing is on right. It was Pascal Fintoni, and it was Roger Edwards.